Welcome, everyone, to Day 73 of 75 Days of Partition, an online podcast that started on June 3rd to mark the 75th anniversary of commemoration of the Mountbatten Plan, and it's going on for 75 days until August 17th, which is 2 days from now. So today, on the 73rd day, we have a very special program with three guests, and starting with me today, right now, I have Mr. Rajeev Shukla, who I am absolutely honored to introduce to you. So let me read you Mr. Shukla's bio. Mr. Shukla has written a book that has just come out, Scars of Partition, and Scars of 1947, Real Stories of Partition, which I can't wait to learn about. But before we do that, let me read you Mr. Shukla's bio, and we're going to watch a brief video after that, and then we will dive into learning a little bit more about Mr. Shukla's book. So Mr. Rajiv Shukla is a renowned Indian statesman, donning multiple hats in various fields for more than 4 decades now. He has earned great success as one of India's top sports administrators, and as a journalist, a respected politician, popular television host. He's currently serving as the vice president of the Board of Control for Cricket in India, the BCCI. He served as a chairman of the India Premier League multiple times as well. He's a former minister and member of the Rajya Sabha and a Minister of State for Planning and Parliamentary Affairs. He presently serves as member Congress Working Committee and state in charge for Himachal Pradesh. As the host of the distinguished and popular talk show Rubaru, he interviewed eminent personalities including political leaders, film stars, cricketers, as well as international figures. His journey in the print media as editor and contributor of various English and Hindi dailies gave voice to his in-depth analysis of national and international political scenarios. Welcome, Mr. Shukla. It is my absolute honor to be interviewing you today and to learn more about your book. So I suppose at this point, Anshul, maybe...
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Punita.
Of course, welcome. Anshul, I think you're going to be playing a video for us to introduce the book. Thank you so much, Anshul, for showing that to us. So, Mr. Shukla, I am absolutely honored to have you today here. We usually, because our show is so concerned and our organization is so concerned with personal stories, I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about your personal connection with partition.
Well, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you for doing this women's service by launching this the Partition Archive. And I'm told that you have, done 10,000 stories. So, this question that what I've got to do with partition is something which I'm yet to figure out because I'm not able to understand why I got into it. I come from Kanpur, which is in UP, that was hardly affected by partition. I've got nothing to do with this. I haven't seen it with my own eyes. No, I'm none of my family members were, victims of partition, nothing. But when I moved to Delhi as a journalist and start going to this Punjab, I was covering Punjab during terrorism. So I got to meet lot many families there who had migrated from Pakistan, and they used to use a very, very peculiar word. कि हम पीछे से हैं. I'm come from the back. Back means Pakistan, which was West Punjab that point of time. Then for number of delegations as a journalist, as a member of parliament, also in SARC summit and different summits, I've been to Pakistan also. There also I met lot many families and read lot many stories which were published there. So this thought came into my mind that there has to be an agony was on both the sides. Both people from both the sides suffered. So there has to be a comprehensive book which should reflect the agony of both the sides. Because one estimate suggests that 1.2 million people were assassinated, out of which 600,000 were Sikhs and Hindus, and 600,000 were Muslims. So equal sufferings. I mean, both suffered. So, I mean, if you want to look at it with human angle, I mean, I mean, every human being, if he comes to know of these tales, these stories, these gory incidents, he will, he will be moved. He will be emotionally carried away. So was I. So then I decided to, find out more and more. So I must have been to Pakistan for 25 times, and I collected lot many. I met lot many families, and those people were in that point of time, 85, 88-year-old, 90-year-old, 91-year-old. So I spoken to them. So it's a personal account. After that, I collected lot many documents and evidences from there, and so was here. So then I tried to write this book because so your question that how I've got nothing to personally, I've got nothing to do with the partition because I was my family or me were not affected by it. But I feel more attached to their their sufferings, their problems. Every person in Delhi will tell you a new story if you meet him. If I start writing, there'll be you have collected 10,000 stories, probably there'll be 1,000 more stories. Every family
Thousands more.
has suffered.
Yeah.
So, I mean, keeping that in mind, I decided to write. So during lockdown, I penned my thought, and after that, this book was, published. And it's good that I mean, people like you who have done so much work and so much research on it, they have picked it up and having this discussion today. So I would like to congratulate you for that also.
Yeah, that's really heart touching that, after hearing all of these stories, you wanted to start bringing them out to other people, sharing them with other people so that we can create this human bond and human connection to that suffering and hopefully overcome and heal the wounds. And, I found it really interesting that you said you were from Kanpur. Actually, there was a lot of partition migrants that settled there. Maybe you came across them. My own family, my father grew up in Kanpur after partition. So,
Yeah, you are right because Kanpur has got sizable population of migrants, and they call them refugees. Not many Sikhs and Punjabis they are living there because when they came from there, they settled in Kanpur. Kanpur was an industrial town, so they were there. But I belong to Kanpur, so personally I didn't suffer, or my family didn't suffer. We were
right.
original, habitant of Kanpur. So, but these people, so in Kanpur also, we knew. I mean, there are a lot many friends of mine who suffered. Their family suffered. Their forefathers, their grandfather, their fathers. So, I mean, I know all these stories are there. So maybe because of that, because I was, very friendly with these people, Punjabi people. So I felt it. Like Kuldeep Nair, he told me his own story. Rajendra Sen, he was an expert on Pakistan person. He was also a victim of partition. He told me all this. So I mean, meeting all these people, then thinking of writing something was the whole basis behind this book.
Thank you for sharing that. Also, I've learned that you have traveled extensively in Pakistan, and that also forms some basis of your book. Would you like to tell us about your travels there and how that informed your views?
Well, Pakistan basically, I traveled as a journalist also for several conferences, then as a member of parliament also, as minister also I went in several delegations. Then when Rajiv Gandhi is the prime minister, I accompanied him as a journalist, and he had gone for SAARC summit. Then I also went there, so I got to meet the entire leadership of Pakistan, the bureaucracy, the other people. Then for cricket also, because this 2004 cricket series, I was the architect of that. Jagmohan Dalmia had told me that you organize it, but it was very difficult to get it organized, and the government was also reluctant. So I met Vajpayee, he was the prime minister, that we should allow it, and he was very magnanimous. Immediately said yes, please go ahead. And he overruled everybody in the Ministry of Home Affairs and allowed this trip. Then all these players, Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, and they all spoke to me. They were playing in Australia. That why are you taking, sir? Why are you taking us to Pakistan? Even Musharraf is not safe there. Hmm. If there is attack on his cavalcade, then what is the guarantee that we would be safe? I said, don't worry. I went to Pakistan also. I spoke to Mr. Musharraf. He said, Mr. Shukla, don't worry. I'll I'll be providing the presidential, I mean, that kind of security to your players. So they should not worry. And with folded hand, I will go to each and every stadium and will request Pakistanis to cheer for Team India.
That's
And this is
incredible.
what he did. He actually delivered that also. And then I convinced we had a security meeting, 2, 3 security meeting with our players. And finally the team went to, and Mr. Vajpayee hosted a tea, I mean, a reception for the departing Indian team. So he told Mr. Saurav Ganguly that मैच भी जीतना लेकिन दिल भी जीतना. So this is what he had told to Ganguly. I remember yesterday because I was also in that group. And then we went to Pakistan after the visit when I spoke to Sachin Tendulkar and Saurav Ganguly. Asked that, you know, now what do you feel? He said, super, fabulous, fantastic. We had never thought of it. It's good that we came to Pakistan and played here. And actually, we won the series also. And I remember when I taken, then Priyanka Gandhi one day phoned me that I would also like to come. So Priyanka, Rahul, Mr. Arun Jaitley, he was then minister in Vajpayee government. We all went there. And just in, well, I'll narrate you one incident in Karachi. Pakistan was about to lose. Last over was about to be bowled, or last remaining 2 overs. So the commissioner of Karachi police, he came to us. He said, I would like to request Gandhi family to immediately make a move, because in case if Pakistan loses, then there can be riots on the streets. So we don't want to take any risk for them because they are the special guest of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. They have been given high level security, so they should immediately move from there. Priyanka refused. He said, "No, I'll watch till the end. I'll let anything happen on the streets. I'll face that, but I won't go." And finally, the state by Pakistan won. And to our surprise, when we were going back to our guest house, we were made to stay by the government of Pakistan. People were they, I mean, they were, lot queuing up to welcome them on the street and outside the guest house also. Hundreds of people were gathered, they waved us, they cheered, and there was no problem. So that kind of, I think that was the 2004 and up to 2009 when this Mumbai incident took place. That was the golden era of Indo-Pak relationship because of that
Very
one.
interesting. That's very, very interesting. How do you think that trip impacted not only your perceptions, but also the perceptions of everybody that was with you? And then taking that a step ahead, the perceptions of people in both countries since they were watching, these matches take place.
Well, Gunita, one thing, I mean, that's my observation, or I think people to people, there's no problem. Excellent relationship, as if two departed brothers. Hmm? What you will call it? I mean, bichode bhai. है ना? So, as if they meet, then they're a perfect bonhomie amongst them. But when it comes to the government level, to the diplomatic level, to the army level, then there are problems. All the conflict is there. People to people, perfect relationship. And you might have heard lot many stories who had gone to Pakistan that these taxi wala, they were not charging any, they were not taking money from it.
Yes.
And shopkeepers, they were giving things free to them. Restaurant people, they were not taking money from them. Lot many stories, you might have. And all those stories were true actually. It's not that hype had been created or something. Actually, it's true. So people to people, there's no problem. But when it comes to the government level, then the problems are there.
Oh, that's very sad. So when you were there, did you come across stories of partition, of people who migrated there?
Yeah, lot many students, lot many people. Hmm? Yeah, lot many people I met there. Actually, all these people, I mean, who have been mentioned in this book, they met me during these matches also, earlier also. So I went to their houses and met their grandfathers, and their grandfathers and grandmothers, they narrated the story. That was
Oh,
the personal account of them, the way they suffer. So everything is true because they themselves told me, and that I have, written down in this book. So lot many stories. I mean, you might have seen the book, like one lady, like this Tambur Bande. So he used to go to Bangalore. He was a lecturer of Lahore Law College. So he used to go to Bangalore for debates. So I was going to Pakistan for my Rubru series to do interviews of Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif and all that. So he met me in the flight and we became friendly. So after that, whenever he used to come to Delhi, he used to meet me. Whenever I used to go to Lahore, I used to meet him. So one day he took me his house. So and this match was going on. So I took Sunil Sethi also along with me. So there in from one room, his grandmother Nani. So she called me inside her room, and I went there. And so who's this lady? She said, "Okay, you are from India." I said, "Yes." So when are you going back? I said, "In another week or so." When are you coming back again? I said, why? Why you want to know that? No, no, just want to find out when are you coming back. I said, maybe in a couple of months or so. So she said, can you get me one thing? I've got a personal work, but don't tell it to my family members, to my daughter and others. I said, what work? She said, I want some soil from Bombay. I belong to Bombay.
Wow.
I am a part. My father was a freedom fighter, Parsi family, Choksi family, and they were in freedom movement. So we were rich people, but I had fallen in love with Taimur's grandfather, who was a young officer in Navy in Mumbai, in Bombay, then Bombay. So I had fallen in love with him. Then I got married to him, and my family was there was no consent of my family, and I came along with him. And since then I haven't been to India. It's almost
Wow.
60 years. I've never
What a
been to
story.
India, but I'm completely attached to India, and I want some before I die. I want some soil of Bombay so I can touch to my forehead, and I can die peacefully. So I got emotionally carried away. I immediately came and told Sunil Sethi who was with me, this film star. I said, "This is what she's saying, this lady." So he also got. She said, "Can we meet?" She also met her, and Sunil Sethi started talking to her in Marathi. And she was just, after 60 years, she would have spoken in Marathi, but she was very fluent in Marathi also, this Sunil Sethi. I mean, look at in childhood, she must have learned that language, and she was so fluent in Marathi, I can't tell you. And then Sunil Sethi and I decided that soil too we'll give later if we could. Otherwise, we can do one thing, we can give her the flag Sunil Sethi was carrying to be waved up during the match. She handed over that flag to Naniji, that you please take it. Her name was Mini Choksi. Huh? So we gave that flag to her. And Taimur is still tell. I mean, now she's no more. She died a couple of years ago at the age of 88 or 90. So Taimur used to tell us that whenever any match used to happen, India-Pakistan match, Nani used to sit on her wheelchair with Indian flag in her hand. And she used to cheer for India while we used to cheer for Pakistan. So that was the scene.
Absolutely
How can we
adorable.
describe it?
So did she
That
get
was
her soil? Were you able to bring her the soil?
trial. I couldn't because what I did after that when he came back, I spoke to the Ministry of External Affairs that a visa should be issued. Let's take her to Bombay and she herself should pick up some soil for herself and revisit her family members, her home and everything. So the government of India granted the visa, but her health condition was not such that she could travel to India. And daughter, the family member, they also dissuaded that, if she goes there, it would be very difficult for her to go to Delhi first, then to Bombay. So she can't afford that kind of travel.
Well, she got the
So,
flag.
but she
She got a
was
flag.
very happy. She was very happy with that flag, equally happy with that flag. And she always to use Indian medicines. She used to, order and get Indian medicine, Amritanjan, Amritara, all these Ayurvedic medicines she always used. That used to be around her bed.
That's amazing. You know, this era that you're describing, where journalists and so many officials were able to travel much more easily to Pakistan, and I'm assuming Pakistanis were able to come to India. Do you know if this has changed? How has this changed since then? Is it easier now, or was it easier then?
It was very easy. I mean, it was much easier then because the visas were easily granted. And, yeah, after this series for 5 years, it was a golden period, I'm telling you. Conferences were being organized. There were a number exchange of delegations, even mobile phones. Indian SIM was, uh, Indian SIM and Pakistani SIM were easily available. People used to interact and chat on mobile phone also. Now there's nothing. So that kind of relationship I don't think we would ever get. That was a golden era, I think.
And in terms of the interviews in your book, how many interviews are from Pakistan? How many from India?
Equal number of interviews. I mean, 5 stories from there, 5 stories from here. And two are of general perspective, whether Jinnah's vision could be achieved or not.
It's fascinating. And what was your experience like sitting down and talking to these individuals and learning from them? What was the sort of personal transformation that happened for you?
Well, it was a very moving experience, and I can tell you, Vinita, that there are hundreds of stories in which Muslims saved Hindu and Sikhs, and
Yeah.
Hindu and Sikhs saved Muslims. Those stories could not be highlighted the way they should have been highlighted. Everybody suffered. I mean, hundreds, thousands of people they were killed and they were, homeless, but they were uprooted. But yes, a lot many people were saved also. Like I'll narrate one thing about Manmohan Singh's story. So I was a minister under him. So often I used to meet him when he was the prime minister. So one day I was sitting with him and I said, "Sir, I've gone to Pakistan, and I went to Nankana Sahib and Nankana Sahib Gurdwara, which is the birthplace of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And there's one delegation of Sikhs. They met me and they said they are facing lots of problem in getting Indian visa. So, sir, they have given me this application or memorandum for use, which I want to give you. So he read this, says, yes, why don't you? Yes, I will tell foreign minister to resolve this problem, so they can easily get the visa. Then he was suddenly looking at me and he said, "Ki, Rajiv, I also want to go to my village once."
Wow.
So I said, where was it? He said it was Gaha village in Jhelum district, which is currently in Chakwal district. So I want to go on. So I said, what do you want to see there? He said, I want to see my school there. So I said, have you never been to Pakistan after partition? He said, no, I've been there once. Because in World Bank, there was my colleague who was from Pakistan. So he had invited me. He was also became finance minister there later. So he had invited me and I had gone, but I only went to Rawalpindi and I visited one Gurdwara where I used to go during my childhood on Baisakhi. So I visited that Gurdwara and I went to Rawalpindi to the bookshop where I regularly used to go. But I didn't go to my village. I said, why didn't you go to a village, sir? Then he was completely moved. He said, what had happened that my mother had died when I was on a few months old or something. So my grandparents, they raised me. So I was too attached to them. So when all this problem started, my, father had taken us to Peshawar. There he was working for some dry fruit company. So he was working there. So he took us for studies there. I was in high school. So then we received a telegram that grandfather is no more. So what had happened that when these riots had started, so all the senior people of the village they gathered together and they decided that this problem should not occur in their village. So we must have a meeting and sort out all these problems. When all these old people were meeting, suddenly the younger people they attacked on that group, in which his grandfather was also assassinated. So
Wow.
he said, and his house was razed to the ground by the rioters. So
Incredible.
nothing in his house, but what he told that my grandmother was saved by a neighbor who was a Muslim. So on one hand, these Muslim young men they killed his grandfather, but grandmother was saved by Muslims only. This is what he told. Then his uncle, he took everybody to Chakwal, and from there the whole family was rescued. But he said, I still remember the face of my grandfather. That's why I couldn't visit to my village. I didn't go to my village deliberately. I was so emotionally charged and carried away. But now, I feel that I must go there once as a prime minister. But that desire could not be fulfilled. It couldn't go because the situation was not that,
Hmm. Oh,
uh,
that's sad. So when you were hearing these absolutely incredible accounts, were you writing them? I know it seems like you were hearing them in passing. Were you writing them down as you went along?
Well, I mean, hearing these stories always used to get me moved, and it increased my interest in writing the book.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then I know that you have to go pretty soon, so I'm going to ask you just one or two more small questions.
Yeah.
I know that you talked about cricket in your in a chapter in your book, and what I wanted to know was, how do you think cricket impacts the relationships, the people-to-people relationships? Is it mostly positive? Is there a mix of positive and negative? I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
At the end of the day, positive. By and large, positive. But during the match, it's like a war-like situation. But once the series ends, and after that, it really bridges the gap. It brings people together. So, like 2004 series, and subsequently 2006 series, it brought the two nations together. Everything. It was a back channel diplomacy or track to diplomacy, you call it, but actually it brought the two nations together. The people of two nations together. It brought. So cricket really helped. So and there is a theory that when cricket matches take place, then there is a war-like situation. It enhances the hatred amongst the people. But actually, my this is what we discussed in BCCI also, as well as Pakistan Cricket Board, because there were people like Shahryar Khan, who was the chairman of the Pakistan Cricket Board. Hmm. So he was very pro-India, very friendly with India. And Imran also used to play, and he also number of he had also lot many friends in India. Actually, he has written that his best friend is in his autobiography. He has written that his best friend is this Mehta, Vikram Mehta, who was his room partner in Oxford. So this is what is so lot many people. So there is a theory that is also the solution of that was that if there are frequent matches between the two countries, every day we are winning and losing, then this kind of feeling will go away. So there should be series, this cricket series more frequently. But the safety of the player is equally important for us. So now in BCCI we have taken a decision for last many years that unless government allows us or permits us, we will not play in Pakistan or with Pakistan.
We're getting a lot of audience questions. I'm just going to ask one. Somebody wants to know, who is your favorite Pakistani cricket player?
Actually, if you go, I mean, everybody will say Imran Khan that way. But actually, if you go by the subtleties and nuances of the game of cricket, then I think Amir Sohail, he was one of the best, and Saeed Anwar, he was one of the best opening batsmen.
There you go,
And as a
Ashok. You have your answer.
and as bowler, Wasim Akram.
Thank you so much. And then my other question is, you talked about track two diplomacy. How do you think stories can play a role in track two diplomacy?
Definitely, I mean, if your the solution of everything is dialogue and communication, exchange of views. Social media has helped that way a lot, but it has damaged also a lot. Anything can be put on social media, and everybody is privy to it. So that sometimes it becomes a problem also, sometimes it helps also. So I think people like you, people like me, other people who are interested, in these things, they'll have to find out a solution, amicable solution.
And then one final question that's also partly coming from the audience. There's a lot of people in that age group of 75 plus who were born on either side of the border in India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, and they want to visit their homes. And at that age, it feels like they're not really a threat to any of the countries. How do you think the subcontinent can move forward in at least giving this age group a final chance,
And
to
this
visit
is
their
a very good question. This is a very good question which you posed. Actually, I've been, you know, talking about it for last 10, 15 years. And there used to be one senator in Pakistan called Kashmala Tariq. I had spoken to her also that why don't you set up an NGO there, hmm, with the help of that government. And in India also we set up an NGO, and all those people who want to visit their, place of birth once in their lifetime, they should be, you know, facilitated for that. And but she couldn't do much, and we had organized everything, but from Pakistan side nobody came forward. Otherwise, lot many people like the story which you must read, the Shahrukh Khan's, Gauri Khan's Nani, grandmother. She once wanted to visit to her home in Lalpur, which is Faisalabad now, but she used to call it Lalpur. Oh, Manu Puttar Lalpur ek bar le chal. Manu Puttar ek bar Lalpur le chal. So her, heart was still in Lalpur. So she wanted to visit. So then only I decided that I must, we must do something to. So now there are very few people are left. I'm talking about those people who were 20-year-old or 15-year-old or 25-year-old who were alive at that point of time, who still remember their house. But now but still people are there who are 90 years, like this Dr. G.P. Talwar is 96-year-old and he's still doing his job. He's a scientist. There's a story about him. When he left Lahore, he was 27-year-old. He remembers him. So yes, so I think Nita, you can do something. And
We'd love to help. We have so many requests all the time, so I'll have to contact you and see what we can all do.
On that side, you'll have to find out someone. Maybe this Taimur Bande can do something because he's very, that way energetic and very enthusiastic, and he's a true Pakistani, patriotic Pakistani, but at the same time very friendly with India. So these kind of people may do something.
But do you think the government needs to be involved because visas are involved in making this happen, and NGO by itself cannot really do that much?
As visa issue needs to be addressed, that I mean, both the sides they flag up the problem of security concerns. So that can be sorted out. That when this NGO or that NGO, that group, they recommend it could be given, they will take guarantee that they will take these old people to their roots and they will bring them back. There won't be nothing. There won't be anything hanky panky. So that can be sorted out. That's not an issue because I also know people in government and being member of parliament, I can really talk to the people. That can be done. It is a good suggestion I've been working on, but I couldn't succeed so far because I didn't find anyone in Pakistan as yet.
Yeah, well, let's work together to make it happen, maybe. And one final question: how can people get a hold of your book?
Well, it's available on Amazon.
Amazon.
W.H. Smith. It can be brought in, and for you, I can courier the book.
I'm going to order my copy on Amazon as well. But thank you. When we meet, I will get it signed. So it's Scars of 1947, Real Partition Stories. So please check it out on Amazon. There's going to be a link in the description of this video on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you so much, Mr. Shukla, for taking the time to come out.
Thanks a lot. You are doing a wonderful job, and my all best wishes for your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And for our audience, please stick around. We have Mr. Nissid Hajari, who wrote a book several years ago, who is going to be coming on next. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to turn over the mic now to Aprajita Dagar, who is co-hosting this show with me today. And over to you, Aprajita.
Thank you so much, Kanita ma'am. Hello, everyone. I'm Aprajita, a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 73 of hosting esteemed guests, and it is an honor to welcome Nissid Hajari. Nissid Hajari is Asia editor for Bloomberg View, the editorial board of Bloomberg News, and author of Midnight's Furies, The Deadly Legacy of India's Partition, winner of the Colby Award for Military and International Affairs. The book is also a finalist for the Council on Foreign Relations Arthur Ross Book Award and the Shakti Bhatt Prize. It was named one of the best books of 2015 by the Seattle Times, NPR, The Daily Beast, Quartz, Amazon, and Shelf Awareness. Hajari writes columns on politics, history, and economics, and edits Bloomberg's commentary from Asia. Earlier, he spent 10 years as a top editor at Newsweek International and Newsweek magazine in New York, where he was responsible for the day-to-day running of the print magazine, overseeing Newsweek's global team of correspondents and editors. During his tenure, the magazine won over 50 awards for its foreign coverage, which included the first exhaustive investigation of the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and several critically lauded special issues on China, Iran, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a former East-West Center Fellow. Hajari graduated summa cum laude from Princeton University in 1990 and earned a master's in comparative literature from Columbia University in 1996. He has lived in Seattle, New York, Hong Kong, New Delhi, and London. He and his wife, Melinda Page, currently live in Singapore. Welcome, Mr. Hazari. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'll ask my first question straight away. What inspired you to write your book, Midnight's Furies? Or it was a topic which was highly researched and quite documented as well. So what new information does your book has to offer, and how did you get inspired to write it?
Thank you. There were two reasons mainly. One was audience. I'm an Indian American, grew up here in the U.S., and partition is not a story that is generally familiar to Americans. It's not taught as part of our history. It's not something that people know very much about beyond those who have seen the movie Gandhi or something like that. And at the time I was starting the book in 2010, the U.S. had been involved in the war in Afghanistan for a decade at that point, and so many of the problems that the U.S. was running into there could be traced back to partition, to the sort of enmity between India and Pakistan that had grown out of partition, that would still drive much of Pakistani strategic thinking. It drove their support for the Taliban, drove them to increase their nuclear arsenal, drove their support for various extremist groups in Kashmir and in Afghanistan. And all these things, could not be understood properly unless you understood the worldview of the Pakistani military and Pakistani strategic establishment. And that, I think, to understand that, you need to understand partition. So on the one hand, I wanted to bring this story to a new audience. But then as I did the research, you also realize that even though the story has been incredibly thoroughly covered on both sides of the border and in the UK, as you can imagine, most of the books that are accessible to a general readership, not purely academic, are fairly biased one way or the other. The Indian versions blame Pakistani leaders for most of everything that went wrong, and if they don't blame them, they blame the British, and vice versa. The Pakistanis blame the Indians as well as the British, and it stands to reason that in an event this massive, with this kind of these kinds of repercussions, the hundreds of thousands of deaths, could not be traced back to a single villain. And it's important, I think, to understand the mistakes that both sides made in the run-up to partition and during the weeks immediately following it, and to take a sort of more sober, independent view of that question of who is to blame, because it really can't be, and you can't point the finger at one figure or one side.
I think there's no single answer to that question. We cannot put the blame on just one person, whether it was the British or whether it was the other community. The answer is complex. Also, I was wondering, when we read the title "Midnight's Furies" and the deadly legacy of partition, I'm piqued to ask you this question: that what do you mean by Midnight's Furies, and why do you call it a deadly legacy?
Yeah, so this goes back to the question of the repercussions of partition. So midnight obviously is a word that many people associate with the moment of independence because of Nehru's speech that night, because of the book Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, and so on. So that was meant to evoke the moment. Furies, though, has something to do with what came out of partition. When you think about it, there is an assumption that many people make that if there had been no partition, there would have been obviously no violence, no deaths, no tragedy, and so therefore that was the original sin to decide to break up the subcontinent. But it's impossible to prove or counterfactual, but it is possible. First of all, that partition didn't need to happen. But secondly, if it did happen, that there's no reason it had to be violent. Other countries had also split throughout history. It has happened since then, more peacefully. Jinnah would often say that he expected India, the new India and the new Pakistan, to be good neighbors the way the U.S. and Canada were and still are. These two countries were tied together economically, they were bound together culturally, they spoke the same languages, ate the same food, dressed the same way, and so on. There's no reason that they had to be set at odds. But they were, so the question that I approached my research with was why? What happened in those months leading up to partition and the weeks after partition? What took an event that, first of all, it didn't need to be violent, but then when it did become violent, why didn't it bring the two countries together? This was a shared tragedy, a shared emergency that both governments were struggling with. Again, it's conceivable that they could have worked together to try and put down the violence and to try and restore stability. And there were efforts to that end, obviously, on the ground at the time. But it didn't work. And instead, what happened is you sort of unleashed these furies, these sort of paranoias and stereotypes about the other side. This kind of narrative grew up, on the Pakistani side in particular. This narrative that India did not accept the partition as legitimate, that they believe Pakistan would and should fail quite quickly, and should be reabsorbed within India. And that sort of idea, mentality, mindset has persisted. And it, there are many reasons why it has. Many things have happened in the past 75 years, and there are good reasons or understandable reasons why certain people would want to maintain this mindset. But it did come out of the span of just a few weeks and months. And what is interesting to me was how that happened. And then the legacy part is, why has it lasted 75 years? Why, again, even if this happened at this moment, and you would think that maybe the memories would fade over time. Maybe as generations passed and younger people grew up, that you would expect it, tensions to ease, but they haven't. And again, you can't blame all that on the leaders who were in charge during partition, but the mistakes they made at that time set us up for the situation we're in now.
So, does your book in any way provide answers that there could have been another way? We could not have a partition actually happen. It could have been avoided altogether.
I think it definitely could have. Part of what my book shows, I hope, is that the mistakes that people made on both sides didn't only occur after August 15th. You can point to Muhammad Ali Jinnah's negotiating tactics, his sort of insistence on having Pakistan, his apparent refusal to negotiate, to compromise. It frustrated Indian leaders like Nehru and Gandhi quite greatly and quite understandably. But there were many moments in the year or 5 years leading up to partition where various people could have made compromises that would have prevented it. I mean, first and foremost, the British, I believe, if they had decided to move faster towards independence, starting in World War II, at the beginning of World War II in 1942, the Americans were pushing the British government very, very hard to grant self-government to Indians in order to encourage them to join the war willingly, to fight on the side of the Allies, to resist the Japanese, and to do so because they would expect to have full self-government after the war. This is what the U.S. promised the Philippines. They believed that the British should promise the same thing to Indians. If that had happened at that time, I don't think you would have seen a partition. I think the Muslim League at that point was quite weak. The demand for partition was really limited to a small elite group of Muslim leaders. It was not a mass phenomenon. I don't think it would have transpired. But even much later, in 1946, barely a year before partition, there was another attempt by the British to create a compromise that would satisfy both sides. And it was incredibly complicated, but it involved sort of having a federal India with a great degree of autonomy for the Muslim majority regions, the regions that became part of Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh. And both sides actually accepted it reluctantly. And there's no telling how long it would have lasted, but they did accept it. And Jinnah only pulled out after Nehru gave a press conference where he was being pressed by his supporters about why he had accepted this compromise and given up a degree of power. And he essentially said, well, we're just saying this now to get rid of the British. And once they're gone, we'll do whatever we want, which is not the kind of thing you want to hear from your negotiating partner, right? So I think Jinnah and the Muslim League felt like they couldn't trust the Congress and needed their own nation in order to safeguard their rights. So I think at that point it became very close to impossible to avoid. But again, we're talking barely a year before partition. There was still a chance to avoid it.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Hajari, and sharing your thoughts on that. So you are saying that we have continued to hold the grudge, to hold the feeling of animosity for these 75 years. Why do you think? What is the main reason behind that?
Well, I think it's different on both sides. Obviously, I think on the Pakistani side, it's more easily understandable, right? So it's the weaker country, it's a smaller country, and what happened from the very earliest days, that within months of partition, after the conflict over Kashmir had begun, the Pakistani army, especially after Jinnah died, felt like it was the only institution holding the country together. It was the best organized institution. It had grown out of the old British Indian Army. These were all Western trained generals. It had a sort of unity and cohesion that the Pakistani government did not. I mean, you have to remember the Pakistani government at this point was only several months old and had to be ginned up out of nothing almost. And so the army felt like they were being pressed on several fronts in Kashmir, obviously, and then when the Indians moved into and took over the state of Hyderabad, there were real fears that the Indian army would then sort of turn west and try and invade Pakistan. And so the army, the Pakistani army, said, we are the only thing safeguarding Pakistani sovereignty. They took the vast majority of the budget for their weapons and their soldiers and so on. And over the course of time, they've had various weak civilian governments, various generals have staged coups and run the government. Some of this is sincere. There are things that Indian leaders have said and done that have fostered this sense of paranoia in Pakistan. But some of it is material too. I mean, obviously this attitude justifies military takeovers of power. Even when they're not formally in power, it justifies their dominance over foreign policy, foreign affairs and security, justifies these massive military budgets, these perks for retired military and so on. It is the sort of tensions with India benefit the Pakistani military as an institution. Now, I would argue it does not benefit Pakistan as a country, does not benefit Pakistani civilians. But that's a separate argument. You can understand why they maintain it. On the Indian side, it's obviously changed over time, and tensions have gone up and gone down. I think what you're seeing today is a little worrisome and unfortunate in that you have a new generation of Indians, younger people with no memories of partition, no direct memories of it, who still see Pakistan as an enemy. Who rightly point to terrorist attacks that have been sponsored by groups that have the support of the Pakistani military establishment. They see Pakistan as a threat, and you have a sort of jingoistic media in India that has its own vested interest in keeping these tensions alive. It helps them with ratings, it helps them with viewership, and it's an easy narrative to foster. So it's unfortunate because there are forces on both sides now that are invested in keeping this enmity alive, and there aren't a lot of people on either side who have anything to gain from lowering them.
Yeah, I think how people who shared culture, who shared the same region and so many things, all the cultural traditions, they've come to see the other community as the other, right? And they have been raised to believe that how they are so starkly different from them, and how those barriers have been created which are unsurmountable in a way, that you cannot get over them, and these kind of barriers have been created which are making it very difficult to pursue the reconciliation efforts, right? But how do you think, we can move away from this legacy and towards reconciliation and existence of more harmonious relationship?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I've been giving a reading and somebody will stand up to ask a question, and will say that they had just taken their grandfather or grandmother across the border to visit their old home, and how shocked they were by how everyone looked the same as them, and had the same food, and were incredibly hospitable, and spoke the same dialect and so on. And you want to shake them and say, what did you expect? It's only 30 miles away, but they somehow imagine that the people on the other side would be thoroughly alien. Those are the barriers you need to break down, and it's going to be a slow process. I don't think that you can have an agreement between a Pakistani prime minister and an Indian prime minister that is going to solve this problem. And because again, there are just too many people, too many institutions on both sides that benefit from the current state of affairs. So you need to break it down from the grassroots. You need to start increasing trade in order to create people on both sides that are invested in peace, that make some money off of this, and it will benefit both economies, laborers on both sides, farmers on both sides. You need to increase these people-to-people contacts. You need to have people going back and forth across the border, viewing each other's media, movies, music, just normalizing each other to the point where people can see what common interests they have, right? Common interests that economically, but also culturally, socially, educationally, and so on. It's going to take some statesmanship on both sides. And I think particularly on the Indian side, some generosity, because again, India is the bigger country, it's the bigger economy. It can withstand these tensions better, I think, than Pakistan. I mean, it does. They do spend a lot on their military and so on, but would do so anyway because of the threat that they perceive from China. Whereas Pakistan, I think, really is sabotaging itself by clinging to these feelings about India. But India, I think it would behoove the government to where it can, where it sees an opportunity, where it finds interlocutors on the other side who are willing to try and normalize relations, to seize those opportunities and to give as well as ask for concessions.
I would also like to ask you one more question, Mr. Hajari, that where do you source your information from? Because a lot of material that is in the records, like the official records, are closed off. You cannot access everything. So where do you get the sources for your book?
No, that's exactly right. Most of my sources are official records. The records, you're right, they can be very hard to access after August 15th, 1947. Up until August 15th, the British have copies of all the same records, right? So they're available in London as well as in Delhi, and they're quite accessible in London. So I actually spent most of my time researching. I spent about a year in the archives, most of it in London, going through the official records. You can also find, again, both in the UK and in India and Pakistan, some records after August 15th. It is harder to access. The records are a bit more disorganized, as you might imagine, because again, in the first few months of their existence, both countries were dealing with a massive calamity, and we're just trying to prevent violence and save refugees and so on. So the record keeping was not a high priority. But the other thing that I found, I think oral histories are quite important, but one overlooked source, I think, in some ways, are the sort of memoirs, first-person narratives, letters, diaries of people who were involved in these events at the time. And you have to take all these with a grain of salt. You have to double check them. You have to cross-reference them against other sources and see whether things check out. And you have to go into it understanding where the biases of these people lie. So you don't just take everything at face value, but by looking at these sort of first-person accounts, you get a sense of how people saw events, in the thick of it, what their perception was, what they were scared of, how they misunderstood each other, which I think is also very important to know, and so on. And one more interesting source I found was in the American archives, because I think a lot of people forget that we're talking between 1945 and 1947. The Americans had emerged from World War II as the dominant power in the world. They had essentially allowed the UK to handle India the way they wanted to. But all of the politicians in Delhi at the time, both from the Muslim League, from the Congress, everybody knew that the Americans were going to be important in the post-war era as a source of money, as a source of diplomatic support, as a source of military support. And so they all talked to the American ambassador and other American officials in Delhi at the time. And those reports that the American ambassador sent back to Washington are fascinating, and most people don't look at them. And because, unlike the British, the Americans really had no dog in this fight, right? They did not have decades and centuries of history here. They didn't have biases built up. They were, I think, a lot more objective in hearing, listening to both sides, and seeing where compromises could be made to make things go better. So it was definitely interesting to see how they viewed events, even though they chose, because they had other problems in China and elsewhere, they chose not to intervene too directly.
So it's very good to know that these records are easily accessible, not just in India, but any researcher who is pursuing their research in UK, or maybe Americas. But also tell me that how much of the oral history was important when you were working on this book? How much of oral history?
I used a bit of it, but I sort of made a conscious decision not to go down that route, because I think one thing you would know better than I, but if you read a lot of the oral histories of these events, so for two reasons I didn't use them. One was that I really was basing my narrative around the actions of the leaders on both sides. So it was an elite narrative. And that, again, it was a conscious choice. You can support it or argue with it however you like. But most of the oral histories that you will find are obviously not from people who were in the room with Nehru and Gandhi at the time, because those people have all passed away. They would be from ordinary Indians and Pakistanis in the Punjab and elsewhere. So those perspectives are important. But weren't necessarily directly relevant to my narrative. And the second thing second issue that I had was that if you do read a lot of these oral histories, which I did, many of the stories start to blend together and sound the same, right? You'll hear many people from different villages, different parts of the Punjab, describe an attack on their village in exactly the same way, describe an attack on a train in the same way. The sort of details have been told and retold so many times that they've taken on, the aura of truth. But when I would double check some of these against what was known at the time in the sort of the military records of where movements of people were, where the train attacks took place, how many people were killed in these train attacks, and so on, they don't match up, and understandably, right? I mean, people. Memories fade, and as people tell stories, they embellish them. They get used to telling them a certain way, and so that's why stories that you hear now can be very different from stories that were told in 1947, in 1948. I mean, just to give you one example, Lord Mountbatten kept very good records of all his meetings while he was Viceroy of India. And you can, in those notes, see, essentially what was discussed, but, with a bias towards making Lord Mountbatten look extremely smart and leaderly. But then if you see what he told interviewers 10 years later, 20 years later, letters that he wrote even further than that, the stories get more and more embellished. He becomes more and more of a hero. Everything, is a crisis until he intervenes, and then it somehow saves the day. So I think he's not alone in that. It's a natural instinct to sort of polish off these stories in a way that makes you look better. And so it was hard to trust those details, and so I tried to stick to documentary evidence where I could.
Your book is definitely a hugely successful book, and I wish to congratulate you on that. And definitely, it would, the researchers and the people who are otherwise curious to know more about partition can come to it with new kind of questions that I'm sure that it will provide answers. Thank you for joining us here today, Mr. Hajari. It was a great pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Those who are joining us, please be online to join our last speaker of the evening, Debanjan Das. Debanjan will contextualize the timeline of the partition in 1947, and we are coming back online in a few seconds.
Hello everyone. So today I'll be looking over the period between 8th to 14th of August 1947 in continuation with the exercise that we have been conducting over the past couple of months, where we attempt to contextualize the the timeline of the partition with the help of various newspaper headlines contemporaneous to that particular period. So I guess. Right. So as I said, I'll be looking at the period between 8 and the 14th of October 1947, which, as we know, was a extremely momentous period as we are approaching the process of partition. Partition, as well as the emergence of the two independent dominions of India and Pakistan. So, as we'll see, this is a period when the law and order deteriorated significantly. There were negotiations happening between the leaders over the boundary, with the boundary commission report almost being finalized at this point, and it would be released in almost within a week or so. And at the same time, like final negotiations going on between the British and everything. So 8th August 1947. So the first headline on the left hand side says Mahatma to spend rest of life in Pakistan, which I found extremely interesting. Now, this is in response to the uh, law and order situation in Punjab, where, as we know, there were severe communal riots going on at this period, which had no signs of abatement. And Gandhi also urged at the same time to, not to desert West Punjab, while at the same time trying with the governments trying to ensure, at least verbally, like giving verbal assurances that the rights of the minorities in the respective provinces would be protected. Though, as we know, it didn't come to fruition that way because the carnage was uncontrollable at this point. On the right hand side, you see a small report called Mrs. Pandit Carries Free India's Flag to Moscow. Now, Ambassador designate arrives in Russia, reception at airport by diplomatic representatives. So, Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit was the first ambassador of India to the Soviet Union. So, here we see her taking charge as the ambassador there. Then, on the right hand side, we see procedure of transfer of power. Constituent Assembly President to take over from Viceroy on 15th August. Now, this article mentions, so the article actually is a response of what the then Congress President Pattabhi Sitaramaiah told this reporter that on 15th August, the Viceroy's responsibilities would be taken by the Constituent Assembly President till a new Governor General is appointed. So, next slide, please. Right. So it's a similar headline, but on the left hand side, it's the same headline, but from a different newspaper. And given, so this is from Times of India, the headline from the left, and the other headline was from Amrita Bazar Patrika. Now, I have put two same headlines just to show, the different editorial policies of the newspaper. So this particular headline on the left came in a middle page, like in a third or fourth page, while the previous headline was absolutely on the top, like on the first page. So, which again is a reflection of the different editorial positions which newspapers take and can, speaks volumes about how far can we, take, whatever newspapers write as writing as set in stone. So, we have to be very careful about the editorial policy. Hence, I decided to include this as well. On the right hand side, we see a cartoon of a hourglass with the sand almost being over on the top. So it reads the approaching end, and the caption is of how there's only less than a week left in order to before the final transfer of power taking place. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, so if we have been following in the last few weeks, we have been also the newspapers have been constantly reporting on the Indonesian struggle for independence as well, which was going on at the same time as the transfer of power taking place here. And I think in my previous interaction, I have spoken of how there was there was a reciprocation of Indonesian interests taken up by the Indian leaders as well, who were sympathetic to the Indonesian interests against the Dutch colonial past. So here we see that a progress taking place as Indonesians seem to accept the US mediation offer as the conflict between the Indonesians as the Dutch colonial power seems to be continuing. It would only continue. It will only end in 1949. So here we see Indonesians merely accepting the mediation offer as a part of the progressing, trajectory of events. In the middle, we see Mr. Jinnah in capital of Pakistan, rousing welcome accorded at Karachi airport. Now, again, this is self-explanatory, I guess. On the right, retained spirit of comradeship, plea to Pakistan Army. So this plea came from the Indian side to the Pakistani side to ensure the spirit of camaraderie and everything. But how far is it? Did it actually, transpire? Is a question that can be dealt or deliberated upon a lot as well. Next slide, please. Right, this is a photograph of Mr. Jinnah arriving at the Karachi airport, which came in the next day's newspaper on the 9th of August 1947. Next slide, please. Right. The left-hand side headline is extremely interesting because India-wide support for cow protection. Now, if you can read the first line, I am not sure if it's readable, but the anti-cow, I'll read it out. The anti-cow slaughter movement launched by Seth Ramakrishna Dalmia is gaining momentum. Now, this is from Times of India. It's very interesting to note that at this point of time, the Times of India was also owned by Seth Ramakrishna Dalmia. So again, whether or not actually there was widespread, support or not regarding the cow protection movement at this point is a question that can be asked in this context, because I tried to look for a similar report in the other newspaper as well, which I was looking at, but I couldn't find it there. So it can perhaps be again an instance of a newspaper doing their master's bidding, trying to drum up support for a cause which might not be as gaining as much traction as you would have wanted it to. But yeah, it's indeed true that Mr. Dalmia was passionate about cow protection and did indeed lead a movement. How far popular it was or not is again a question. On the right hand side, Indian students in Britain, accommodation problem. Now, again, here there was an accommodation problem according to the article because there was a procedural change on, in how to apply for accommodation. So, which again led to problems for not only the students but also the landlords as well, who were renting out the property, leading to losses and also denial of accommodation to a large number of students because the students were asked to apply to the High Commission instead of the procedure before. So there was a change in procedure which led to massive confusion at this point. Next slide, please. Right. So passed to tackle economic crisis. Commons passed second reading of bill. Mr. Churchill calls it totalitarian. Now, as we'll see also on other days and successive reports as well, there was an ongoing economic crisis going on in Britain, which led to much more, stringent attempts by the Labour Party government to increase government intervention and everything. Now, as the Tories are not really in favor of government intervention at all, here we see Mr. Churchill opposing increased attempts at governmental intervention to the government by the Labour Party government. I hope it's audible because behind me there are some firecrackers, so please excuse me.
Yeah, it's very, very audible.
Yeah,
But that's
it's
part
fine.
of the charm, right? It's the 15th August show. So that's part of the
Yeah.
show's charm.
Yeah, so it's fine, I guess. Just let me know in case you can't hear me or something. Right.
No, I can hear
So,
you. I think we can
yeah.
hear you.
Yeah, it's fine then. The middle report is of the food situation in India being grave, and this also comes up in the other days as well, with the southern and the eastern areas on the verge of a famine at this point, which again would have especially in the eastern area, if there had been some famine like conditions, it would have also created a lot more trouble for the refugees who were now, because the border situation was much more fluid at this point, so it would have further added to the hardships of the refugees. And also remember that it's also monsoon, like peak monsoon, so again everything seemed to be against the people who were crossing from one side of the border to another. The food crisis is worsening it. The right hand side, transfer of power ceremonies in Pakistan, official program drawn up. So again, I guess it's self-explanatory. It just lists out the ceremonies that would be taking place and everything, with the program being drawn up. And we would see in a later date also the similar report for India as well. Next slide, please.
Just a
It's the same
second.
slide.
I just want to comment. I just want to comment quickly on that first
Yes.
newspaper clipping you showed us. It's very interesting that It feels right now Britain is going through almost the same thing with the cost of living crisis, and the Tory government is saying it's anti-freedom or something like that to for the government to intervene and improve people's lives. And it was, of course, it was a wartime, so they were going through a big crisis. I think it's very interesting when you look at something like this. You look at a very old newspaper clipping, and you can see similarities to today. It seems like you've taken a time machine back. It's fascinating.
Indeed, it's like, I mean, yeah, because I think inflation is also at a record high in Britain at this point and everything. And like added to the Tory struggles within the Tory party at this point, like things are not at a good stage. And I think in a later newspaper report also, we'll see how there was a problem in the Labour Party government as well at this point of time. There was a division over how to tackle this economic crisis. It's the same one. So next slide, please. Yeah. So 10th of August 1947. So Nehru demands Monroe Doctrine for Asia. So now Monroe Doctrine was an integral part of the US foreign policy whereby US attempted to US adopted a strict policy whereby they directed the European powers to not intervene in the Eastern Hemisphere, that is US. This w- this became an important part of the US foreign policy at a time towards towards the end of the 19th century, when it was further expanding into or trying to topple regimes in as it usually does in Latin America and everything. So yeah, so it seems like Nehru demands a similar thing where there would be non-intervention, as you can see in the uh, headline also. Armies of one country must not stay in another. So again, a non-intervention policy similar to what the US seem to have preferred uh, in case of Western European powers intervening in the US and everything. On the right hand side, we have constitutions should be able to stand the test of time. Alladi on instrument of government, it should contain elements of growth and expansion. So again, it's like a snippet of the Constituent Assembly debate where there was, so the debates went on, as we know, for like almost 3 years, 3 to 4 years, and it left behind enough scope for incorporation of numerous amendments to the constitution, and also ensuring that certain portions of the Indian constitution out of remain out of purview of changes by the legislature. That way it can't be abrogated, which were declared later as part of Supreme Court cases over the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and later as well, which would constitute the basic structure of the constitution. If you can see a small cutout below, like it's about on flood havoc in East Bengal. So again, this is August in Bengal is peak monsoon time, and rivers overflow, and even now, like there has been rain for days in different parts of Bengal. So one can imagine the situation therein. They're there, given like added to the food crisis as well as the floods that are taking place, and also like the political situation being extremely volatile at this point. On the right hand side, we have food control for another year imperative. Food and Agricultural Organization fears serious political and social upheaval. So in the post-war period, we see that mm, it's not really a localized problem when it comes to the food crisis and everything. It seems to be a worldwide phenomena where the governments would end up resorting to more and more attempts at rationing or controlling intake of food and everything, so as to not create, and of course it had the potential of creating a serious political and social upheaval as well. Next slide, please. Right, this is a cartoon which seems to take a dig at Gandhiji, because if you remember from the previous day's headline that he had declared that he would be moving to Pakistan across the partition. So it's just a depiction of that. On the right-hand side, we see famine in many areas, shock to food officials. Again, it's uh, the same thing, how famine, there is increasing reportage of the situation of the famine, which might indicate how grave the situation was at this point of time there in different parts of the country, because I also found a report which stated that similar situations was also there in Punjab as well. So it seemed to be a countrywide phenomenon at this point of time. Next slide, please. Again, widespread flood havoc in Bengal. It's the same thing again, just the differences in coverage, because in Times of India, as far as I noticed from the days that I took over, there seemed to be more coverage, as in more space being given to the grim situation that was unfolding, including the law and order situation, or say the food crisis and everything, while the other newspaper that I looked into, Amrita Bazar Patrika, seemed to be restricting it to a smaller portion, or say it's in the reportage is inside, not on the front page, for instance. So while they would comment on, say, the negotiations taking place at the highest level and everything. So again, just to highlight the differences between the reporting techniques of the two newspapers, I've put the same thing up here. Now, Indian Union and Indore State negotiations in progress. So again, one of the most important features of this time was the negotiations that were taking place between the various princely states, some of whom were refusing to accede to India, and the negotiations that went on over and over till 1948-49 in some cases, and some of which remain unresolved or disputed as well even today. So here we see a report on negotiations taking place between the princely state of Indore and Indian Union. Yeah. Next slide, please. So again, 11th August 1947, no standstill agreements with non-acceding rulers. Congress to seek merger with State People's Conference in the context of Hyderabad. Pattabhi on impending changes, subject not let down by instrument of accession. So here we see that the interim government taking a more hardline stance over uh, those rulers it deemed recalcitrant, who were refusing to accede or playing hard with reference to accession and everything. So they refused to get into a standstill agreement, or were bargaining hard to not give them enough time and everything. So that's one. Below, you can see inauguration of the Pakistan Constituent Assembly with Jogendra Mandal presiding over the opening session. Then on the right hand side, you see Mahasabha support to the UP and Bihar movement. Now, the Mahasabha was seen to be against the partition of India, at least at the all India level. And if you had been following over the last few weeks, there were also reports on how the Mahasabha had been preparing or for protests, demonstrations, and everything over this time, over the period of time, threatening even direct action, and a large number of provincial level Hindu Sabhas were also organizing their own protest movements. So here we see that UP and Bihar, in UP and Bihar, we see that there was an intensification of process by these Hindu Sabhas, and how the Mahasabha at the All India level is extending support to this movement as well. 14-day notice to the Panth Ministry in UP, agitation to be carried on all India basis, program committee set. Yeah. Next slide.
Could you
Yeah.
please could you please clarify one thing? Like, what were these UP and Bihar movements? They didn't want to be part of a new state?
No. That's not the point. So UP and Bihar movement in this context. So there were also a large number of provincial Hindu Sabhas, right? A large number of organizations. So they were protesting against the partition in itself. Like they were against partition. So they were intensifying demands of, not letting partition happen with demonstrations, protests, and everything. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Again, it's the same report. Framing Pakistan Constitution. Mr. Mandal presides at the opening of the assembly. Mr. Jinnah's election as chairman today. It's the same thing. On the right hand side, Muslim promises to minority not reciprocated. Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan attacks Mr. Kripalani. So here, Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan accuses Mr. Kripalani of not Mr. Kripalani and the Congress Party and the interim government of not securing the interests of Muslims in India. Like it's not reciprocating the way what Mr. Khan claims that the Pakistan government had guaranteed to the minorities in Pakistan. So here's a exchange between Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan and Mr. J.B. Kripalani on the issue of protection of the minorities, which continued to be a bone of contention between the two governments over the next few years, and I think it still goes on today as well. So next slide, please. Right. Steel nationalization policy leads to crisis in Britain. Split threatened in cabinet and Labour Party. Again, it's like there was a controversy over which methods to take. So because increasing government intervention was also perhaps not taken kindly by certain sections of the Labour Party as well, which threatened a split in the uh, government and within the Labour Party. And as I had mentioned, the UK at this point was growing in the post-war period was going through a severe economic crisis as well. So over and above that, the political turmoil also seems to be increasing within the government, as it usually happens in whenever there's an economic or other crisis, as different parts of the government seem to believe in different ways of tackling the issue. So here we see the Labour Party also seems to be divided over how to go about the entire economic crisis, and specifically the steel nationalization policy. On the right, Tagore's home to be a national monument in Kolkata, Rajaji's first task as the governor of Bengal. Then, right, bugles sound. Okay, bugles sound dawn of the Freedom Week. Again, I think it's self-explanatory that way. Then on the right hand side, we see heart of the people was one and indivisible. Mrs. Naidu hopes divided India will unite again. So Mrs. Naidu here is Mrs. Sarojini Naidu. Again, it's like the Congress, though, like Congress Congress said that they had accepted partition with a heavy heart, and that was the official policy, officials, outlook of the Congress, that they had accepted the partition, at least at the all India level, with a heavy heart and everything. So here we see different Congress leaders at different points of time ending up making statement calling for unification and everything. So yeah, next slide, please. Governor General issues 6 orders under new act. Powers of a defense council and high courts defined. Arrangements till April last. Power present structure of army to remain. Form of control outlined. Then on the right hand side, dissolution awaits those who seceded. Patel confident of ultimate union of India. Call for consolidation. Country cannot be united by those who are out to divide Hindus. Again, it's like the government seem to be adopting a more hardline stance, to a degree even communal jingoism, in order to force those who were playing hard to unite or accede to the Indian Union as well, through use of negotiations and force. Pandit Nehru at Allahabad, visit to Sir Tej, discussions with local congressmen. So here's a photo of Nehru visiting Allahabad to visit Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru, who was a prominent Congress leader in UP. So that's reported. there's a small cutout on the right, which says Hindi Day in UP. So again, it's like it um, it the celebration of Hindi Day in UP. So again, like one of the questions that was emerging at this point of time was the use of official languages, and there was a huge debate in the Constituent Assembly of India over this, with representatives from the southern part of the country as well as from the eastern part of the country being vehemently opposed to uh, y- Hindi becoming the sole official language of India after independence. And so, as a compromise formula, what was taken up was that English and Hindi would continue to be uh, official languages for at least 15 years. And uh, and the constitution also granted official status to around 22 languages under the 8th schedule as well. So, but again, this issue of language would flare up again in the 1960s. So, and at the same time, it needs to be noted that a significant mm, part of the national movement in the context of North India uh, was also driven by this demand of unification of, I mean, a united, singular Hindi language, because Hindi, as we know, was consisted of different dialects which were spoken at different places in parts of North India. So there was an attempt from the late 19th century onwards to standardize Hindi and everything, which again became an important part of the national movement as well as it went along, especially in parts of UP, Bihar.
Yeah,
Next slide,
yeah,
please.
that
Yeah.
is just that is so interesting that you bring up the national language issue because again, we in Pakistan are having the same issue, especially with regards to Bengal, and we weren't letting Bengali be the national language. And Qaid-e-Azam in 1948 ensured that English and Urdu were the languages. So, and that created a big rift that ultimately led to the secession of Bengal from Pakistan with other languages as well, and the drive to make Urdu the national language. And what I find interesting is that in both India and Pakistan, there's on one hand the nationalism where it kind of seems like they're forcing this one language and one nation onto not just the princely states, but all the other states that are already part of India or Pakistan. It almost seems from your newspaper clippings and from yesterday as well as if there was a lot of confusion and there wasn't just one idea or even a unified idea of what Pakistan or India actually was compared to what we feel now. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, at the national level, we see the national movement in case of both India and Pakistan taking a completely different stream, but there was always uh, undercurrent of regionalism and everything, which were often, if not, which might not always be in sync with the movement taking place at the national level, and sometimes they were often in conflict with each other. So we, in the case of the Congress, for instance, we see that the Bengal Congress, for instance, were often at loggerheads with the All India Congress Committee because of the positions it ended up taking, and we would find more such examples, even say with the context of other parties, perhaps in the context of Muslim League also, we might find the same thing happening. So that element of regionalism was never completely eliminated over the course of the national movement, but and sometimes it emerged as a in contestation with the larger all India meta movement that was taking place. So yeah, that way. Yeah. Next slide, please. Right. Gandhiji, perturbed over Chittagong floods, appealed to people to organize relief, advised to East Bengal and West Bengal leaders. Gandhiji tours riot affected areas and everything. So, again, it's a continuation of what we are seeing of how heavy floods affected Bengal at this point of time, adding to the misery of the people living there and so on and so forth. So, and Gandhiji touring riot affected areas. So again, throughout this point, throughout Gan this for the last, in the days leading up to the partition, Gandhiji went to different parts of the country in order to tour the riot affected areas. So, yeah, that. So on 15th August, I think I might be might be forgetting, but he was in Kolkata, I think, which was one of the worst affected areas at this point of time. The right-hand side report called Coalition Ministry talks again. Provincial leaders discusses plan to end communal frenzy. So it's very interesting. So the report actually states that there were talks in between the regional leaders of the partition affected provinces over, whether uh, to come together and form a joint effort in tackling the law and order issues that were taking place. And this was taking place, without the national leadership of both the Congress and the Muslim League being kept in the loop and everything. They were aware of it, but like it was mostly an initiative driven by the local leaders. But unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition. It's again a what if in history, that what if this might have succeeded and it might have reduced the intensity or whatever of the riots and everything. Anyway, next slide. Right, 13th August, America's pledge of friendship to both India and Pakistan, president's goodwill measure, cooperation in work for world peace, again on the eve of independence. It's a diplomatic gesture taken by America to uh, gesture of friendship to India and Pakistan over and seeking world peace and everything. In between, Mr. Jinnah to be known as Qaid-e-Azam, Constituent Body Decision. I think again self-explanatory. New Chief Justice of India, Sir H.J. Kania, being appointed. Again, it's like self-explanatory. The headline. Next slide, please.
Just to say, sorry, just a second.
Yeah, sure.
I read a little bit of that Qaid-e-Azam story. It's very interesting. And once again, they actually broke a debate, a battle of wits raged over the motion in which the main participants were from Bengal. I find that very interesting. They said that titles and things like that should not really be conferred to a politician. I think that's very interesting. Like it wasn't a completely, once again, a unified. Everyone wasn't on the same page about this honorific, which is like in Pakistan we don't know him as Jinnah anymore. We know him as Qaid. Like it, like as a kid, you almost think that his first name is Qaid and not Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is the
What does
first time I'm
Qaid-e-Azam
seeing.
mean?
It means the great leader.
Okay.
So it's the first time. Thank you for showing me this. This is so interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen a news report about the time he became Qaid-e-Azam, and it was actually a constituent assembly decision. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
fascinating.
that's very interesting over the title and everything, that entire debate. Anyway, next slide, please. Right. Large number of states accede to the Indian Union, instrument of accession signed by rulers. Forces to celebrate Independence Day. Hyderabad, Indore, and Bhopal group still lagging behind. Again, this newspaper, again, and here is a photo of the numerous governors of various Indian states who would be taking over. So the governor is the equivalent of the Indian president at the provincial level, sort of, because it's a mere constitutional head and everything. And all these leaders were part of these five leaders were part of the Congress and played a crucial role in the national movement as well, led of the Congress. Gandhiji takes up residence in Calcutta's disturbed area. Mobs break. Mobs break into. Mobs ended up
Premises.
breaking into premises. Evening prayers abandoned. So here we see that Gandhiji, in spite of his decision to tour riot-affected areas, did not seem to be warm, getting a very warm reception from the public in general. So that way. there's a small report at the bottom which says walled city of Lahore on fire. So there was, yeah. So I had looked into 3 newspapers for this. So the other newspaper I looked into was the Civil and Military Gazette, which unfortunately I couldn't reproduce it here because of some issues. And it had a much more detail because it was printed in Lahore. Perhaps it had like an entire front page coverage of the situation being extremely, extremely bad in Lahore at this time. But again, it's like this particular paper is again Amrita Bazar Patrika. So we see that it's reduced to a very small portion of the entire page, with more importance being given to the accession or say the appointment of governors than say the grim situation that might be unfolding in the different parts of of the subcontinent and everything.
Yeah, and it's
Indonesian.
interesting. So just I've interviewed a couple of people who were in Lahore on 14th August, and like the pictures they gave me was that it was on fire, the walled city, people were being murdered left, right, and center. Yeah, it was really bad. Please go on.
On the right, we see Indonesian case admitted to the Security Council. So here we see that the UNSC finally taking up mediations between the Indonesian Republican government as well and the Dutch colonial authorities and everything. On the left hand side, we see India to continue as original member of the United Nations. Pakistan must apply for admission, says N. Lai. So again, it's self-explanatory. So yeah, next slide, please. Here's a photo of the Punjab Boundary members of the Punjab Boundary Commission. So it says that the members of the Punjab Boundary Commission, after concluding their discussions at Shimla. So again, the Boundary Commission report came like 2-3 days late. I think it came on August 17th. So on the day Pakistan was born or India was born, they still had no surety of which of their final borders at this point of time. So again, everything was done in a very hasty and also very bureaucratic manner without taking into confidence the people who might be actually living in the areas and everything. Enemy on the left hand side, enemy property in Pakistan, government to take over assets. So enemy property is, so if any other state, like say for instance, if the government of India owns property in Pakistan or Pakistan owns property in India, so that sort of thing, if I'm not mistaken, is referred to as enemy property. So it's like the newly formed states would take over the enemy property and would sell them off and everything to raise assets. Next slide, please. I think this would be the last one. Again, Mr. Gandhi's house stoned by mob. Hostile demonstration in Kolkata. Again, it's the same thing. Usual prayer meeting abandoned. So again, it's like Mr. Gandhi, in spite of his intentions, didn't seem to be getting the reception he might have wanted. In spite of his intentions, didn't get the warm or couldn't really abet the situation in Calcutta, which was at this point really, really bad and everything, with refugees pouring in from East Bengal and killings going on. I think this is the last slide. I don't think there are any more left. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, just one final thing. So we've just shown a lot of clippings of Gandhi and people's issues with him. Could you please clarify why it was it because of his? Because we in Pakistan have been taught that the issue with people had with Gandhi started when he demanded that the Pakistani government be given their share of the resources and the military goods and stuff like that. But could you please tell us if there was something else at play here?
That became an issue indeed when when Gandhiji actually asked the government of India to give Pakistan its due share of resources. So there was a difference between the Congress High Command and the Congress High Command, the Indian government, and Gandhi. Now, other issues in this context. So there still remains a section of the population which sees Gandhi as, you know, being important in an important player in, you know, who have caused partition and everything, and were critical of his, mm, overtures to Muslims or this entire concept of bonhomie and everything. So, and again, it's like over a period of time, more critical studies of Gandhi have emerged, which seem to question various aspects of his ideology. But I mean, here in this case, I'm not sure whether those can be applied or not. So that way.
So, what was the reason that these mobs were attacking Gandhi and his home at that time?
I mean, Calcutta at that point of time was in midst of a severe riot and everything. So perhaps I'm not sure. Maybe it was just mob reaction and everything. So especially in Bengal, a section of a section of the people still feel like Gandhi had, matlab, they seem to prefer, like, Gandhi was not as popular a figure in Bengal as, say, Subhash Chandra Bose, and because there's because in popular imagination there was this rift taking place between Gandhi and Bose, which went back to as late as 1930s and everything, over Bose becoming the Congress president over Gandhi's choice and everything. So that way, that might have played a role in it, because still in Bengal, Gandhi is less of a major figure as compared to, say, others. So that might be a reason, and also it might just be a mob reaction, because I think the place where he put up was I think in Beleghata, if I'm not wrong. I might be wrong, but if that be so, then the area is a major hotspot for the law and order issue. It was at the center of the city and everything, so that might, or it might just be a reactionary mob reaction to Gandhi's presence. That might be. I'm not sure. I can't say for surety anything. These are just conjectures.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your for this wonderful trip down memory lane and for showing us the timeline of partition as it was happening through the eyes of the major newspapers of that time. And thank you to the audience for joining us. Please join us tomorrow again to commemorate 75 years of partition with journalist Sabir Bahumek, scholar Antara Chatterjee, and Fahad Nahvi. Thank you. Have a good night and good day.